Thank you, Robert. Appreciate the introduction. It's good to speak with everyone today. Again, my name is Ford Winslow, CEO of ICE Cybersecurity. We're going to be talking about the security aspect of DevSecOps and how to integrate security into your DevOps practice today, in all the layers in people, process, technology, all with the goal of protecting data for your organizations and your customers. You will see in the presentation the Ionian logo. That is our platform, our product. And we will be we'll be talking a little bit in the context of that product today, but this is mostly about the practice of DevSecOps and really thinking differently about how you approach application development and application security.
Hey, Ford, before you kick off, I just want to remind everyone that if they have any questions, they can click a button at the bottom. There's a Q&A button where they can ask their questions, and we'll either most likely wait to the end of the call to answer those, or if they're appropriate at the time, then Ford can choose to answer those as he sees fit. So back to you.
Thank you, Robert. We'll have a little time at the end for questions. This is the one sales marketing slide in my deck I'm obligated to go through. Our platform is Intelligent Cybersecurity Orchestration Platform with the 3 modules you see there, tying together your people, your technology, and your organization with one continuous security delivery model. We can talk about that later. You can visit our website and find out more. For today, we're going to be talking about apps and app development and how security relates to that. The agenda for today, I'm going to try to scare everybody a little bit about your applications for good reason. I'm not a fearmonger, but you should be scared because there's real things out there that are out to get your data through your applications. We're going to talk about a risk-based approach to DevSecOps and how to integrate security into your practices. Securing your tool chain, that includes the tools you use for DevOps and tools that you can use to secure your environments. And then how to educate and empower your users and your organizations and really bring DevSecOps to bear on your applications today. So first, I thought we'd go through a working definition of DevSecOps. This is from AWS, and the model is out there. You can go look this up. And I like this definition because we're able to reference it and start talking about DevSecOps in a common framework. Everyone in the development world is familiar with development life cycles and a delivery pipeline of releases and the feedback loop that's associated with that. But not everybody sees security as an enabler for those phases of the delivery pipeline. I personally have the view that security built into your pipeline makes things go faster, makes your applications less expensive, makes them perform better for your users. And I will ask for questions and comments on that because I feel that that's not the perception of security in the DevOps world. One of my missions and my company's mission is to change that and build security into everything we do. So some facts and figures from this year. This is from this year's Verizon Data Breach report, talking about the motivation of the threats and the attacks that you see carried out against your applications. Financial continues to be the one reason why everybody does anything in the world. Shocker. Followed by nation-state actions. Grudge is down there in the 3rd category, which is interesting given our political climate today. But nothing. Again, financial breaches are why financial gain is why attacks happen. Willie Sutton, when asked why he robbed banks in the early 1900s, he said, because that's where the money is. So the money is in your data, and it's not just your financial records or the ability to steal money from your corporate bank accounts or personal bank accounts. It's your personal information that can be sold behind your back without your knowledge. That drives an awful lot of attacks. Also, operational attacks around ransomware, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So this slide talks about what is being breached and what they're after, the goal of the attackers. And again, about 50% of the target goals are data related to people or health records and social services activities, things that can either be used to gain access to services, so they can be used, your medical records can be used to obtain healthcare services for those who don't have insurance. And medical records, there's a dark web price list going on out there that you can find, where you see a block of 10 medical records advertised for about $4,500. And the value of that is a person that's uninsured or lives outside the United States being able to get top-notch health care for a condition that would otherwise not be able to be treated. So let's look at how attacks are happening. And this should start scaring the app developers out there in the world. The applications are the gateway to the data in your networks. And you see this all the time. We see this a lot in the security world, where a website or an application may have a third-party plugin or a skin or something that's downloaded or configurable, where ransomware is introduced, or malware. Malware is continuously ransomware is more prevalent as a type of malware, and it's being introduced through third-party integrations. We found quite a few integrations with websites or databases that introduce malware into a web platform or web application database that then spreads throughout the network. One word of caution here in your web applications. I mentioned this in the second bullet point there, is platform integrated applications. So you're talking about cloud apps, things that are hosted in places like Google and AWS. Believing their security story is important, and understanding that they have the core capabilities to be compliant is important. However, implementation of security and security for your data is your responsibility. We see often where development teams say, oh yeah, we're in AWS, it's secure. It's as secure as you make it and as secure as you test against. So we'll let this slide sink in just a little bit about how long it takes to actually detect that a hacker has breached your network and has access to your data. This to me is shocking. This is the latest data from Verizon Data Breach Report, which is one of the best sources of information related to security statistics. They've been doing this for 11 years, and they, along with the Ponemon Institute, which you'll see referenced in here, produce some of the best information if you want to go out there and see what's really happening. This slide says that the attacks take minutes to execute, and we're seeing that attacks get executed faster and faster, that they're in seconds, or in certain instances where you're dealing with very high value targets, milliseconds. And then they attack and they're out. And detection, I don't know if if any of you guys have visited your SOC recently or looked at your security monitoring tools, but there's very few organizations in the world that can detect and respond that quickly. So that takes vigilance, and it takes, this seems a little bit hopeless, but it really is a DevSecOps problem. How do we deploy technology that has resiliency built in, has vulnerability management built in, so that the vulnerabilities that are being compromised never get introduced in the first place? That's the only hope we have. So I thought this was an interesting piece of data. This is what I'm calling enterprise ransomware. It's not just for users anymore. The graph on the right talks about the things that get attacked by ransomware. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you can tell this was people and individuals that were clicking on things or were downloading things or fooled into clicking links. As much as we talk about that being the attack vector now, It still is there, but it's not as much. Now it's a compromised application or a network that allows a user device to be compromised and allows that ransomware to spread throughout the network. This is a bold new game, and we've seen this in our organization with some clients that we've worked with as some of the most serious attacks. This is where your databases and your file servers become encrypted. Users may still be able to log in. They may still be able to send mail through Office 365, but your critical applications and your data are held for ransom. The graph on the left was personally shocking to me as I read through some of the statistics. That talks about the percentage of ransomware or percentage of malware that has ransomware as a payload. So malware used to detect things, steal your credit card information, just pipe data out of your network. We've gotten better about detecting those things through firewalls and through network security, through application security. But now, so the attack vector that's left is ransomware, to introduce a file or an executable on your network, and then take it for hostage. We're almost getting through the fear part of this presentation. This is a part that should speak to the developers in the audience. This talks about the vulnerabilities, overall vulnerabilities of a full stack application, of your typical full stack application. So typically when we run a scan, we see 73, the 3/4 of the vulnerabilities are the network and the platform. You think that's a good thing. And look down below and understand that the network vulnerabilities are fairly easy to solve, and most of them are a little bit lower risk than the application vulnerabilities. Most of the critical vulnerabilities reside at the application layer. And this, of course, corroborates the data from the Verizon data breach report and what we see out there in the field, that you may not have many vulnerabilities, but those are the critical ones, the ones that are in your applications. All right, here's a use case I'll talk about. This occurred in 2014, so this isn't new, but it is I use it because it is marks, to my knowledge, the first DevSecOps failure and poisoning of a development pipeline. So Oracle bought Micros. Micros is the point of sale system that many of you trust your credit cards with. You can see on the right, deployed it across 180 countries, 330,000 sites, and countless implementations. The way this attack was carried out is a Russian crime syndicate known to have exfiltrated about $1 billion globally, planted a patch on the customer support portal site for Micros, and Micros directed all their customers to download that patch. Many of them did, allowing this well-known Russian crime syndicate to exfiltrate credit card information for countless hundreds of thousands of users. This started with a single infected machine at Oracle that attacked, that spread laterally, and was able to then attack and gain access to an account that could post a patch on the patch site for Oracle. So let's let that sink in a little bit. Oracle spread malware to every one of their customers. I bring this up because that's a very bad day for that development team and for everyone related to Oracle. And we're all talking about this today because I assume everyone is trying to avoid being the focus of this sort of conversation. So now we'll move into some more positive thinking and some ways that we can address some of these problems. We understand some of the risks and the severity of what can happen. I like this graphic. this is a very typical approach as I see it from the security world. We're trying to get more and more integrated into the DevOps community and the conversation, so we're not continuously cleaning up the mess out there. And this is the only way that we're going to really approach this. And the way that we do this is by having a frank, risk-based conversation. That's not fear-based. It's not based on delays and doesn't pit the business against security, but allows everyone to work together to get releases out and ultimately hit the business and financial goals that we're all tasked with. So, in my mind, the only way to execute DevSecOps is through a risk-based approach. A lot of what we're going to talk about here was through research and work that was done with a whole lot of smart people over the last 15 years, creating some of the guidance that you're starting to see out there in the industry. On the right side, these are actual things that we're starting to see in the NIST cybersecurity frameworks. They're being asked for. And they're starting to, the security frameworks and approaches, for instance, the NIST framework that came out in April of this year, 2018, ask for a risk-based approach and asks organizations to keep a risk register and to understand the relative risk of their security vulnerabilities to make sure that they're attacking the right things at the right times. That's a whole lot different from previous approaches where that pitted security against development. And I think everyone has felt and heard the pain of the restrictive controls around testing, around hardening, and those things that have really driven a lot of people to cloud and to more agile development environments. Security is catching up, and the regulations, much to my pleasure and excitement, have caught up. Based on a lot of work that a lot of people have put in over the last, call it 15 years, working with the government to help put those out. So the goal on this slide is really to talk about DevSecOps and security as a continuous lightweight approach to your applications. So it helps you with deployment, it helps you with data security, it helps you have the conversations with your customers around privacy that allow you to deploy more, to make them more satisfied, and ultimately help your organizations make more money or achieve their goals. So in order to talk about the risk-based approach, we need to understand risk a little more depth. This is a fairly standard way to calculate risk, and you'll see all the risk frameworks out there. We'll talk about severity SLD, or severity likelihood detectability ratings. And it's very important that we as development community and DevSecOps teams learn to communicate and be conversant of all the factors that lead to risk. One of the surest ways to lose credibility as a development team or as a security team is to take a the sky is falling approach with management, tell them everything's horrible and that you have to spend a ton of money in order to be secure. That may work in certain circumstances, but in my experience, that's not a long-term approach, and that will lead to ultimately either running out of support funds or ultimately not putting the right resources in the right places. So when we're understanding risk, I'm going to go from right to left here. Risk is a measure of the probability that a threat will actually exploit a vulnerability. So let's let that sink in a little bit. It just doesn't mean that all threats are created equal. It doesn't mean that all vulnerabilities are created equal. There's a probability that a specific threat, whether it be human-based or computer-based, is going to exploit a vulnerability in an application or in a process somewhere. And creating that register and understanding all the factors that lead into that is a little bit of the art of risk management. And so when you're trying to break down the conversation around risk, understanding the severity of what can happen is very important. If you're in a regulated system and understanding the context in which you're working, understanding a data breach in a HIPAA-regulated system is a whole lot different than a data breach in a development environment that holds no individual's data. So having that conversation and really understanding what's the worst that can happen and in what scenarios can that happen is very, very important, and having a conversation around that with the team and with executives. Understanding your threat scenario and understanding the vulnerabilities in your specific systems is really around this likelihood bubble in the middle. So who's out to get you? So first off, understand that if you're holding healthcare data and you're in or user data and you're in that 50% of the attackers are after what you have, then you're pretty likely that you're going to get attacked. If you're holding data that nobody cares about, first of all, you're likely that you're going to get scanned in automated attacks, but it's very unlikely that a sophisticated attacker is going to come after you. So having a way to measure that and to think about this in call it a high, medium, low matrix, and in a simple way is very important in understanding what to do and how far you should go with this. Then detectability. Everybody forgets this one. But if you're monitoring and you're constantly looking and you can detect and respond to attack very quickly, then your risk can actually be very low. That's often not the case. And so detectability is often low. And as you seen from the previous slides, 140 days to detect a breach is not what I would call a high level of detectability. So here's an example, and this, we're using some reports out of our tools and things that we do for clients of ours, but to talk about how do you make a data-driven decision on what to do and how to implement controls and take action within your applications. This is an example of a risk out of a risk register where we look at an SSL vulnerability in a web application. This was discovered in a vulnerability scan. And there are several things that you can do about this. With the web server itself, there's some things you can do with the network and the platform, and there may be some things that can be done in the application. The important thing is to take action on this and really understand what you're looking for an outcome. So the way we're tracing this and the ability and the way we can build the data to make a rapid decision is by understanding first on the left, having a place where you can keep all these things, these risks, and track them. Second, then going into that web server, being able to understand what's running, what that server configuration looks like, what else can it talk to on your network? Is it in a DMZ? What else is matted on there? Do you have 10 different other things running on there? Is that a customer portal that might have, or your corporate website that might not have any data on it, but the server is also hosting your HR portal? Okay, these are things to consider, and having your active information about that server that you can look at gives you the ability to understand severity. Vulnerability scanning, so understanding not just that there's that one SSL vulnerability, but what else is vulnerable on that machine, what else is vulnerable on that subnet or on the network that could take advantage of that SSL vulnerability either from the inside or from the outside through a user session. And then the last part of this is understanding SIM, that's security information management, logging. And so that's taking log files from your firewalls, from your hosts, and looking at them to watch for intrusion. And while you're trying to figure out what's going on and can you actually detect and shut down a port, or say based on certain activity, can you block an IP range? And then certain things to think about when you're looking at it this way are, does it even matter? Because are you geofenced? Are there other ways that you can go and make this less risky as a whole, so that you don't have to maybe go update your application? So these are all things that you can do once you're having a data-driven conversation, which is how you have the DevSecOps risk-based approach. we're going to go through, this is an example of what you can do at different stages in the life cycle to start implementing. And how you can engage your teams. One thing that we find often is that teams come to us and ask, and we say, great, what would you like us to do and how would you like us to help secure your systems? We say, well, what do you need us to do? And they say, well, what do you want to do? And so then we have this conversation that's very circular. We're finding that dev teams, DevOps teams don't necessarily know what to ask for and how to implement it. And so it takes a long time and it's clunky and whatnot. So I would like to explain a little bit of that here, and that hopefully you can go back and start knowing what to ask for from your security teams. Because we as security people often aren't the best in, reading minds. We try, but we don't do it well. And, like all tech people, sometimes, talking to people is not our strongest suit. So these are really important things to take an action-based conversation approach where you ask for a threat assessment in your design phase. It is a fair thing for you to take your security team and say, please give me a threat assessment on this application. They should be able to answer that question for you. And if not, they can tell you what it's going to cost to get the answer. If you're asking them to put security requirements into your application, you may have a tough first conversation on that because you're going to have to develop some common language, but that's what you should be doing. The best, most effective teams are communicating with security up front to try to understand what the requirements are. And that works both ways for security folks. I've seen security teams start engaging business units to start understanding what the requirements are from the business, how users want to use systems. How do we make things more seamless, like with single sign-on, integrated authentication, role-based access control, all the things that we can bring to the table as security people, but maybe we don't know to or don't understand the need because we're not engaged in the conversation. And I'm not blaming the dev community on that. I think we all bear that burden to make sure that we have all the appropriate stakeholders at the table. And then as we're going through the build process, that's the part where we don't want to get in the way, but we want to make sure that you have good security around your repository, good security around your dev environment, so that doesn't mean that you're restricted from developing, but that you have a safe place where you can develop and not worry about malware being injected into a release. And also understanding that your code is going to operate in a fairly similar way in production under the production security controls once you get there. Another part of this, we talk a lot to teams when they have custom applications that have maybe been out there for a while, that they have 250,000 lines of code that's never had a code review. That doesn't need to be daunting. It doesn't need to be expensive. You can take it a part at a time, a module at a time. But building that into the practice so that as you release updates and as you release portions and modules, make sure that you are doing that static code testing just to make sure you're testing against the OWASP standards. And then running vulnerability scans in your test environments to see what actual vulnerabilities may be released into production. I argue that the Oracle example, Oracle would have or may have uncovered this malware had they been doing more dynamic testing in their test environments and in their release environments. So I'm going to give an example here of how this is working really well. And I want to say these are, I don't give Google kudos for a ton, but this is something I think they do very, very well. This is Google's reward program. If anyone on the phone is part of those 274 paid researchers, good job. I know a few of them. They do really good work. So this is an example of a program where Google rewards for those of you who don't know, Google rewards developers and security researchers for discovering new vulnerabilities and reporting them to Google first so that they can fix them. Microsoft does this, AWS does this, all the major players out there do this, but this is a fantastic way to uncover what your vulnerabilities are that you may not know about before they get released into a vulnerability database, where an attacker is now going to be able to scan your customers, uncover your vulnerability before you have a chance to release a patch. For those of you that don't know, there's all sorts of back-end agreements, between organizations that publish vulnerabilities and organizations that create software on how vulnerabilities get published and when they're released. So you as a developer need to understand that there may be a motive out there to publish a vulnerability in your code. So actively going out there and looking for those vulnerabilities, discovering what other people are going to say about them is going to save your countless nights of programming a fix or Band-Aid or a patch or whatever has to happen based on some critical vulnerability that's found. And that's really what we're after in this DevSecOps community here, is to release less vulnerabilities. I come from the systems and network side of the house. I have a data scientist background, so I've lived on both sides of the fence. The system side, where I blame developers for all the vulnerabilities out there, and then I've developed code and I blame platform and system folks for not securing my stuff. We're going to keep that going, but we have to make sure that we're diligent and taking ownership of the vulnerability and the ultimate breach that could occur, because the hacker doesn't really care who's responsible. They just want your data. So now we'll get into the toolchain security components of this, and we can go for months talking about what security tools could be implemented and how to secure the tools that you use, your repositories, your dev environments, and things like that. The most important thing I want to get across in this, though, because we don't have months to talk about this, is that there are tools for every phase of the life cycle. We talked about some things that you can do, but integrating those into a continuous your CI/CD pipeline with continuous security becomes the way that you actually turbocharge this, and you build, and so you don't have any stage gate blocks. Where you're I'll talk later about an example. The first example I know of where a production release was delayed because the security team said no. But that's coming more and more. And I've seen it. I've actually been a part of a release this year that was delayed because of security and privacy concerns. And we could not release the platform until those were cleared up. Rightly so. The one part that we didn't talk about much yet is the design and how you plan the runbook for the application. This is something that that security teams need, is understanding how the application is supposed to run. Also understanding what happens when it goes wrong. This isn't your disaster recovery planning. This isn't your business continuity plan about how you respond to disaster or downtime event. This is what happens when you see a security event happen. Having that clearly mapped out reduces finger pointing, reduces overlap, but most importantly, reduces the gap where you see an incident and nobody does anything. You see something where a breach occurs, and you've seen this often where a breach was uncovered and it turns out that it was ongoing for a while, and that IT maybe had seen some alerts and they hadn't done anything about it. Coming soon to a courthouse near you, there's legislation out there that would make IT leaders criminally liable if they ignore security considerations. So how do we take ownership of that, and how do we get in front of that as a dev team so that the government doesn't tell us what to do? And that's really in this design of your security tooling into your application, design of your monitoring plan, and planning the runbook for operation as you're in the development phase. All right, we're getting into some tooling stuff that is going to look familiar to some of the developers here. This is an example of how you lay some of these things out through a release and through a feedback and incorporate security into the feedback loop. So that as you're in the planning phase, that's where you're starting to deal with, and you can do this as you're coding and building, starting to build those requirements in the plan documents. When you're starting to test and release, then you're starting to do your code analysis. You don't have to do that all. You have to place that activity strategically throughout your release lifecycle in your pipeline to make sure you're attacking it in the right place. We mentioned training in here, and training is not what happens after you release it. Training and security training for your development team around the platform happens during design and during implementation and during development. It has to. You will see delays, you will see cost increases, and you will see risk introduced into your applications during the last iterations of release if you don't take that training, that proactive training approach with your team. This is a critical way to get security implemented. And then things on the right here are very familiar to a lot of people: monitoring, instrumenting. I'll talk a little bit about the difference between a vulnerability scan and a pen test here. The vulnerability scan enumerates your systems and enumerates vulnerabilities against known databases. A pen test actually tries to exploit those vulnerabilities using common techniques to understand how effective they may be. Make sure you understand that when you're building your DevOps tool pipeline. Again, this is something that we find is poorly understood out there. And people ask for pen tests when they really want vulnerability information. And pen tests can be harmful. You have to do them very carefully, and they can take systems down. But they're very valuable once you think you have everything secured. And then red team exercises, I think we could spend 2 hours talking about that alone. But just to give everybody a term, a buzzword out there, that's when you bring in a security team and you give them a rules of engagement and ask them to go return to go effect a breach on your system. And often that could be a capture the flag type event where you hide a file in an application somewhere, and they have to then present it to you that they achieved using your rules of engagement. Those can be a lot of fun. They can be expensive, but they can tell you an awful lot about how your system will actually be breached. And particularly in high-risk situations where you have where you're a high-value target, for instance, healthcare, personal information, those can be invaluable. All right, the last section of this, we're going to talk about, how do we affect this change a little bit within the organizations. And this is something that I'm probably going to ask more questions of you and your organizations than I have answers for. But I'll illustrate this through some use cases and examples. Sony Pictures, if anybody remembers the big breach that happened there. The press said that the attackers stole huge swaths of confidential documents. One of those was password.xls. Right. This is usually where I let the chuckles permeate the audience. They canceled the release of the interview, the movie, due to concerns around security and around other repercussions. The story behind the attack. The management team at Sony Pictures had invested a tremendous amount of money in security the year before. They cut their budget dramatically the year of this because they decided they'd already bought security and they had spent enough, and they needed to go do other things. So the security team over there was underfunded. They had to cut back, and they were really telling the company that they needed the resources to be able to secure things. And this is what happened. This is one that I wanted to get a little history and background around affecting change. I want to bring up the story of Patch Tuesday and how it was born. I got to speak with the Microsoft security czar, and he told me this story. about how the delay of Server 2003 release went down with Bill Gates and with Steve Ballmer. And apparently it was a very intense conversation because there's a lot of money riding on this. And if anybody remembers, Server 2003 was released somewhere in mid-2004, so not like Microsoft at all. And it was the first time within Microsoft, and the first time that I know of, where a major release of a major product was delayed due to security concerns. And I don't know if anybody, you can talk about this and how it gets judged in history, but Bill Gates backed up the security czar, and Patch Tuesday was born as their compromise, as a way to continuously secure systems so they didn't ever have a delayed release. So this was, in my mind, when this happened and I discovered this, this is a very early example of how an organization affects a DevSecOps change and some of the challenges that go along with that. Okay. So this is the last slide. We got some takeaways, and then we're going to open up for some questions. I want to talk about the way forward and some ways that you can do, some things that you can do. The first bullet point about being a crossing guard, is about security leading the way and being able to be a bridging that chasm and helping the applications out into the production world, rather than being the stop sign and always saying no. Security has to take the role of enabling application releases, enabling agility, enabling speed and profitability. That takes security to raise their game. It also takes DevOps teams to reach out to security in new ways and raise your education level so that we all have a higher level conversation. Knowing what to ask for from DevOps is just as important as security, understanding how to be flexible and to work with development teams. Automation, you're going to see a lot through this, and automated code scanning, I cannot stress enough. There are very, very easy ways to hook up your Git repos, whatever you're using, to automated OAuth scanning tools and make sure your code passes basic security best practices. This is a no-brainer today. If you're not doing it, take this home, look up how to do it, or give us a call, and we'll help you out. Continuous vulnerability scanning, you're going to hear a lot more about that. The days of annual vulnerability scans and pen tests are coming to an end. There's some of that out there still, but that is driving towards continuous. Looking at zero-day vulnerability databases that are updated thousands of times a day, and looking at vulnerability scanning APIs that you can integrate into your applications and your endpoints are the way of the future. And what's going to be really important is understanding how you build flexibility and extensibility into your applications to ingest those APIs. Then the feedback loop to make sure that you can actually act on those vulnerabilities and release patches, release high quality patches in time so that your app is not the one that makes it on the front page of the New York Times. And then one way you can really start today is starting to work with your partners and vendors, working with your third-party integrations, and making sure that you are using secure plugins, secure coding, secure components to what you're doing. Look at the privacy policies of your partners, your platforms. This is probably the unsexiest part of security, but it's absolutely critical. And with that, I'm going to open up to questions.
Hey, Ford, it's Robert. I'm just want to remind everyone, if they want to ask a question, there's a Q&A icon at the bottom of their screen that they can click on to ask a question. I think you also have the option of maybe writing something in the chat window. So we'll sit here for a minute or two and see if we have any questions and go forward from there.
Okay. While we're seeing if we have any questions, I wanted to say a special thanks to Robert and the FB Complete team for putting this on and inviting us to present, to Flashpoint and Susan Rust and her team for helping put this together. And invite anyone that wants to talk follow up after this to reach out to either you, Robert, or me, and we're happy to take on any use cases.
Well, Ford, you probably did such a good job that nobody needs to ask any questions because you've answered every possible question they could have. So I think we can safely conclude this meeting, but I want to thank you for taking the time to take us through this important talk, because as we've discussed as partners, we're very much aligned in the fact that security begins with the first line of code that is written, and it extends all the way through that whole development cycle. So you have to take a very early on approach to this to ensure your security as much as you possibly can. So we're happy that this partnership is continuing. We look forward to doing more. And as Ford said, if you have any questions, certainly reach out to him. You've already received thousands of emails from me, so everybody knows my email address, so you can also respond to me as well. But I think we're good for today, Ford, and everybody who's joined, thank you for attending the webinar. There will be a recorded version of this posted on our YouTube channel, as well as there'll be a short blog post written on our website with a link to this recorded session. So if you want to review any of the information, we'll make it available there. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ford.